Thank you, Chairman. Now we are closing into lunchtime, so I remember this nice play in London, given the total work of Shakespeare in 4 hours, or 2 hours it was, and I will try to have something similar. Now, where is my presentation? Yes. So there have been many things said here already, so I may maybe use that a little bit to speed up. I'm from Orkustofnun, the National Energy Authority in Iceland, and we have the public administration of the energy sector, and we give specialist services and consultation to the government, and we take part in the planning of energy utilization on long term, and we contract and conduct research on resource utilization, and we are also responsible for databases on the utilization. And of course, our most important role is to issue permits both for exploration and utilization of energy and other earth-based resources. So if you want to come to look for gold in Iceland, you come to us for a license. And we issue then the power plant licenses, and in the continuation we are also regulators for the national grid, and we monitor these licenses, the electricity production licenses. And we are responsible for the for several activities, other activities. One very important is the energy fund, which is the way of the government to mitigate risk for drilling in smaller communities around the country, and this fund has made it possible to explore and find geothermal water in very many communities where it even wasn't thought of before, and this is one of the reasons that we are over 90% coverage of geothermal district heating in a country where we have 103,000 square kilometers and 300,000 people. And the longest pipe from the well to the customer in Iceland is actually 63 kilometers. So we have gone to extremes to carry this out. And last but not least, we host the UN University Geothermal Training Program, which is which we are very proud to have in on our premises. The legal environment, which is, as has been said before here, is very different from country to country. And because the legal environment has a historical prehistory that makes it often a little bit complicated from when we are looking at single processes. So we are running on or operating on several acts. We have, of course, the act on the authority itself, and we have the Electricity Act, we have the Energy and Mineral Resources Act and Water Resource Act, Hydrocarbons Act and Seafloor Act. And just to take an example, that when we are issuing a licensing permit for eventual tidal power plant, we have the Energy and Mineral Resources Act, which we would normally issue exploration license on. That is going out to the netting limits. The netting limits are 115 meters out of the low tidal border. This means that then the rest of the license would have to be based on the Seafloor Act. So this makes the whole thing rather complicated. Now, of course, we are not alone. We have the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, also with their laws and their institutes, which we have to cooperate with. It's a Master Plan Act, which has been mentioned here, and we have the Water Governance Act, the Municipal Planning, the Nature Conservation Act, and then the Environmental Impact Assessment Act and the Strategic Environmental Assessment Act. So we have to, when we are planning for power, generation, we have to get this into the planning process. And on the way there, we have to show that the environmental impact and so on. So in Iceland, it's very simple. In many countries, we have limited the ownership of resources. But in Iceland, it's like that the landowner owns the resources down to the center of the earth. So it's quite a piece of volume you have when you own land in Iceland. And we have, well, we would say, some would say luckily, the state owns most of the land where we have the important power resources, or the municipalities. So they are publicly owned. But we have also private land where we have geothermal resources, and these are owned by the owners, landowners. But of course, they have to apply for licenses to us for the utilization and power generation and so on. And there is a relatively new law saying that it's not allowed to sell publicly owned resources to private companies. So it cannot be sold. The energy resources have to be maintained, whether it be in state ownership or municipal ownership. But of course, private persons or companies can sell to other companies. Now, the energy companies, on the other hand, because of this, they can be private. Most of the energy companies or electricity companies in Iceland and energy companies are publicly owned by state or the communities, but there are private companies coming into the picture. And they can lease rights from the owner, the state or the municipalities, but it has to be on a time-limited contract. Sorry. But of course, a private owner is a private owner foreseen future. But then the transmission and distribution, it's in regulated companies, so they could be private or state-owned. That is really they are independent companies today, but they are regulated, and we are the regulators. So here we have an attempt to show the scheme for the licensing process for the public administration of the sector. And if we come to a green field where we want to look for energy resources or monitor water flows or whatever we want to do, we ask for a limited, or we are asked for a limited research license. And this is limited in that way that no impact on land or nature can be done on a larger scale. It has to be somehow non-disturbing research that's carried out. And then when this research is finished, the results can be handed over to the master plan committee. There is one that had newly finished their work, and there will be a new one established soon. And this will then, the master plan committee collects all the possible power plant options in the country for hydro and geothermal, probably also for wind could be coming, and maybe some other, but mostly there are bigger options we are talking about, and they will rank them from a feasibility point of view. It's the environment, it's the societal impact, it's of course the economy, and then impact on alternative land use like farming, tourism, or whatever, or hunting or fishing. And this committee will report to the Parliament every 4th year, and they will classify those options. And we have 3 possibilities: a full stop, or a wait, where further observations or explorations are needed. And if we are allowed to go on, we go to the developer has to report the land impact he needs to make, and then that goes to the planning authority, which will decide if it goes to an environmental impact assessment. And if yes, it has to be done. If no, it goes into the general plan for permits, and then we can start the exploration. And on basis of the exploration results, we can go for, if it's geothermal, we need a utilization license, and in connection with that, we have to have a resource contract with the landowner. The important thing here is that you can start all this process without consent of the landowner. So we can give a research permit for even for private land without the consent of the landowner. And the landowner has to permit access and provide some facilities to make the research possible. But then, when you want to utilize, you have to make a contract with the landowner. And if the landowner is a state, then we come to the problem that Guðni Jóhannesson was talking about earlier. What happens for the resource owner if electricity prices go up and the resource will be much more worth in the time to come? And this debate we are talking about, it's about the question of handing over the rights to a resource to 65 years and not having any possibility to get return on increased value of the resource during that time. If that happens, we don't know that, and that is the problem of all these resource issues. And of course, we will need, by a resource rent or by limited time or renegotiation or whatever, to find a way so that the state will not do the same as when oil fields were handed over in Africa for a very small amount of money 100 years ago, and they are still being exploited with little benefit for the people. And then we need the building permit, the operational license, and the power plant license, which is usually the last license to be given. Here we are trying to change that and try to come earlier into the process, and then you can go ahead with your power plant. Now, the important amendments that has been made now to the legislation is based on the Aarhus Convention or Aarhus Treaty. There is a separation between the political and the government and the public administration. So that before, we were commissioned by the government to issue licenses for exploration and for utilization of power generation. But now the Parliament has given us this, legally we have the authority now to do this. This process is supposed to be independent of the ministry, so that it's just based on laws and the regulatory framework. And if the parts are not happy with our results, they can apply. Before they would apply to the ministry, but now they apply to a special ruling committee and there are several ruling committees under the Resource Act and Electricity Act, and there's also ruling committees under the Information Act, depending on what type of issues are raised. So I will just give you some review of the 6 recent amendments to the energy legal framework in Iceland. And this is about the ownership of resources I mentioned before. It is now, we have now a competition because we have unbundled the companies for distribution and for transmission of electricity. They are now separated from the power generation companies, so that the power generation companies don't have monopoly in their area or district. We have an open market and competition for sales of electricity. And as I said before, we have the authority now to grant licenses. We have the ruling committees. The Master Plan Act was before some kind of a guiding project, but this has now been put into the legislation. So we have a special legislation for the Master Plan, and this has also been moved to the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. And we have now introduced also the Act on Water Governance. We are introducing the European Water Framework Directive, and this is also influencing our work on permissions. So we have extensive annual monitoring, because when we give licenses, we are basing that on simulation for the areas, for the duration over time, and our aim is to see that they are used in to give a sustainable yield over a certain time, and we also are monitoring the chemicals, the fluids, the temperature, and the mass coming out, and the pressure changes in the area, and so on. So there are a lot of parameters that we have to monitor every year to see that the license is fulfilled, or the obligations in the license are fulfilled. Now I will just jump this, because this is what I would like to show you. It's a comparison of energy prices for residential heating. And we see that, like I am paying about 2 Icelandic kronur per kilowatt hour. We see that those who have oil heating are paying about 20 kroner per kilowatt hour. This is to show what natural resources and the pricing and the worth of the natural resources, how it can change. Because in the 60s, people were reluctant to go from oil heating to hook to the district heating systems because of the cost. But now it would be a very obvious choice to do that. And we have to subsidize those unfortunate people, which luckily are very few in Iceland, that have oil heating. 90% of the populations are in the upper 3 pillars there, or bars. So that's good. But if we take the example from Sweden, where they happily sold out their district heating system to a private company, and this private company then priced their services according to what they thought people would be willing to pay before they turned over to some other form of energy. And they found out about 70% of the electricity price was that they could price from the customer without they going to buy heat pumps or whatever to destroy the market. So if we would have direct electrical heating, that cost about 10 kroner today. And if there was a private company pricing geothermal, we would have about 7 kroner a kilowatt hour. And as has been said before, because of this is municipally owned, we are paying down to 2 kroner per kilowatt hour, just cost-based. And this is very important. This shows you that over a period of some 20, 30, 40 years, the value of the relative value of the energy source can change considerably. Okay, I will not destroy your lunch. I will just say that we have about 10 terawatt hours more appropriate for development. And this is and we are on the waiting list about 12 terawatt hours more. So the probabilities are that we can double the electrical generation in Iceland from what is now, and now it's 5 times more than we need. 80% are sold to larger industries. And we could go up to about 10 times more. And of course, this is very important for our future economy, and it's very important that we have good public administration and that we see that the benefits from these resources will be rightfully distributed between those who are making the entrepreneurs here and investing and the public. Thank you very much.